My name is Margaret, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been about taking care of others. I was the kind of woman who believed wholeheartedly in family. I gave everything I had to my husband, my son, and later my daughter-in-law. They were my world, and I did it all out of love. Cooking, cleaning, running errands, making sure everything was perfect for them. Those were my duties. It was a role I embraced because to me, it was the very essence of being a mother, a wife, and later, a grandmother. But no one ever told me that love, in its truest form, was not about endless giving. I never asked for anything in return, because that's what mothers do, right? But looking back, I realized that I should have asked for more recognition, more respect, more of a voice in a house I poured my heart into. I raised my son, Daniel, as a single mother after his father passed away. Those were difficult years, long nights of worrying about bills and whether I was doing enough for him. Daniel was everything to me, and I made sure that he never felt the absence of his father. I put my dreams on hold so I could support his. I worked 2 jobs, sacrificed meals for his education, and never let him feel the weight of our struggles. I thought, one day he'll understand all this. But that day never came, not the way I imagined it would. It wasn't easy and it wasn't always fun. I spent my days running errands, cooking meals, and staying up late to help him with his homework. I was his constant, his rock. Every decision I made was to benefit him, to make sure he had everything he needed to succeed. I wanted him to have the life that I never could, a life free from worry, from sacrifice. It was the least I could do for him after losing his father so early in life. As Daniel grew up, I tried to give him more independence, believing that this was the natural progression of things. When he went off to college, I didn't push him to come back home every weekend. I let him go, even though it tore me apart. And then, when he brought his fiancée, Emily, home for the first time, I was thrilled. I saw her as part of the family. She was young, beautiful, and seemed to care for him deeply. I welcomed her with open arms, excited to have her join our family. Looking back, I realized I made a grave mistake in that moment. I didn't know it at the time, but I was setting the stage for my eventual downfall. I was already losing my place in their lives without realizing it, and my devotion to them, my willingness to always be there, to be the one who kept everything together, was something they never truly valued. When Daniel and Emily got engaged, I assumed that the wedding would be one of the happiest days of my life. I spent months helping with the preparations, everything from organizing the guest list to picking out the flowers. I poured myself into making their day perfect. It was supposed to be the day I finally felt recognized, seen, and appreciated for all I had done. I dreamed of a day when my son would thank me for all my sacrifices, when I would be included in the celebration of his happiness. But that's not what happened. The wedding day was a blur of excitement, nerves, and a bit of my own quiet sorrow. I stood there, trying to hold back tears as I watched Daniel marry Emily, the woman he had chosen to spend the rest of his life with. I tried to smile, to be happy for him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The entire day, I felt like an outsider in my own family. It was the little things at first, small glances that went unnoticed by everyone else. Daniel was so wrapped up in his new wife, and Emily, well, she was busy with her own world, a world that didn't seem to have any room for me. Still, I played my part. I cooked, I helped with the reception, and I kept my feelings to myself. I was proud of my son and wanted to make sure he had everything he dreamed of. But as the night wore on, the pangs of isolation became harder to ignore. The look in Emily's eyes when she would address me, the way her voice would drip with sarcasm when she made small talk, it was all beginning to chip away at the image I had of our family. But I kept my mouth shut, as I always had, because it was his big day, and I didn't want to ruin it. I remember standing by the kitchen, far from the action, watching Daniel and Emily laugh with their friends and family. I felt like a ghost, invisible to everyone around me. I wanted to be part of it, to be seen as something more than just the one who paid for everything, the one who did all the behind-the-scenes work. But that wasn't the reality. The reality was that I was barely acknowledged. By the time the reception was in full swing, I was numb. No one noticed that I was standing by the door, away from the dancing, away from the laughter. I was the one who had made this day possible, and yet here I was alone. Not even Daniel, my son, who had been my world, took a moment to acknowledge me. It was as if I no longer mattered. The truth was becoming painfully clear. I was fading from their lives, from their hearts. And worse yet, I was allowing it to happen. But that night, something inside me began to shift. It was subtle at first, just a quiet stirring deep within my chest. I had spent so many years hiding my pain, swallowing my hurt, putting others first while my own needs went ignored. But tonight, something was different. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when, in truth, I felt invisible, dismissed, and discarded by the very people I had sacrificed everything for. I looked at the empty seat at the head table where I should have been, and for the first time in my life, I realized that I had been the one who was overlooked. I wasn't just the mother who had raised Daniel. I was the woman who had been forgotten. The change had begun, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to reclaim my life, my voice, and my dignity. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone take it away from me. The evening of the dinner was like so many others, uneventful, quiet, and full of familiar routines. But little did I know, it would become the night that would shift everything. I had been invited to dinner at Daniel and Emily's house, something that in my mind should have been an occasion filled with warmth and family togetherness. It was supposed to be a simple gathering, but it quickly became the moment that would crack open years of silence, denial, and unspoken resentment. I arrived early, as I always did. Emily's smile was polite, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the same cold smile I'd grown used to over the past few months, and I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. It wasn't unusual for her to be a little distant. After all, she was busy with work and managing a household. But I knew deep down that it wasn't just that. It was something more, something that I couldn't place but felt in every conversation, in every glance, in every interaction. Daniel, my son, was in the kitchen, preparing a meal with a focus I hadn't seen in years. His once warm demeanor had been replaced by an intensity that felt distant, almost detached. I wanted to ask about his day, to tell him how proud I was of him, but the words got stuck in my throat. He was so busy with everything, his work, his wife, his new life, that I felt like an afterthought. The table was set, the candles lit, and the food served. Everything looked perfect. I had made my favorite dish to bring, a hearty lasagna I knew they both loved. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the dish on the table, hoping it would be met with the appreciation I longed for. We sat down at the table and the conversation flowed, but it didn't reach me. Emily was speaking to Daniel, asking him about work, about his plans for the future. She spoke about her own career, her new projects, her ambitions, while I sat there quietly, almost invisible. I couldn't help but notice how Daniel's eyes never met mine, how he didn't ask me about my day, or how I was doing. It wasn't that he was rude. No, Daniel was never rude, but there was a coldness in his behavior, a detachment that hurt more than any outright insult could. Emily's laughter filled the room, high-pitched and carefree. She laughed at some inside joke Daniel told her, a joke I wasn't in on. And I smiled as I always did, because what else could I do? I was the mother, the one who had taught him everything, the one who had sacrificed everything. But now I was the outsider, the stranger. I was halfway through my meal when it happened. I had just taken a bite of the lasagna when I heard Emily's voice, sharp and cutting, as she turned to Daniel. "You know, we've got to start setting some boundaries with your mom," she said, casually, as though it were just another part of the conversation. "She's here all the time, always cooking, always cleaning. It's nice, but honestly, it feels like we have our own maid now." I froze. My fork hovered in midair, and for a moment, the world around me seemed to disappear. I felt the heat rise to my face, my chest tightening as the words sank in. Maid. That's how she saw me. That's how they both saw me. Just someone who existed to serve them, to clean up their messes, to cook their meals. My eyes flicked to Daniel, desperate for some sign of defense, some look of recognition, but there was nothing. He was looking down at his plate, a slight frown on his face, but not a word. Not a word in my defense. Not even a glance of apology. I looked back at Emily. She was smiling, the satisfaction of her words lingering in the air, her eyes gleaming with a self-assurance that I didn't recognize. It was as if she had just made a harmless observation, as though she had every right to call me that name, to brand me with that label. I felt the sting of humiliation rush through me like a wave, but I didn't let it show. I kept my face neutral, my hands gripping the edge of my plate. I was so used to biting my tongue, to swallowing my pain, that it felt like second nature. But something inside me snapped. This wasn't just a small comment. It was an attack on my dignity, on everything I had done for this family, on everything I had sacrificed. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't just let it go. I stayed silent for a long moment, the anger simmering beneath the surface. My mind raced with memories of everything I had done for them, everything I had given up, every dream I had deferred. I had spent my life giving, always giving, and this was the thanks I got. I was the maid. I set my fork down gently, making sure the sound was heard, and then I looked at Emily. My voice was calm, steady, but there was an edge to it that I had never used before. I've done everything for you too, I said, my words measured, but I won't be treated like this anymore. Emily's smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw something like guilt in her eyes. But it was too late. The damage had been done. I stood up from the table, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. My legs were shaky, but my resolve was firm. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here in this house with these people who saw me as nothing more than a servant. Without saying another word, I walked toward the door. Daniel didn't stop me. He didn't say a word as I walked past him, as I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. I don't even think he noticed. He was too busy with Emily, too lost in his own world to care about the woman who had given everything to raise him. I stood there for a moment at the door, keys in hand, my heart heavy. I could feel the weight of the years, the disappointments, the unspoken pain. But there was no turning back now. Margaret? Daniel called out, but his voice was distant, as if it didn't quite register that I was leaving. I turned back to look at him, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't feel the need to apologize for my feelings, or for the decision I was about to make. I'm done, I said simply. And with that, I handed them the house keys. I'm done, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I stepped out into the cold night air, closing the door behind me. And just like that, I walked away. I walked out into the night, the sound of the door closing behind me ringing in my ears. The cold air hit my face, sharp and bitter, but I hardly noticed it. My heart was still pounding, my thoughts a whirlwind. I wasn't sure what I had just done, but I knew with every fiber of my being that I couldn't go back. I couldn't let them, Daniel, Emily, continue to treat me like I was nothing. I hadn't even realized how much I had been holding inside until that moment. For years, I had been quietly sacrificing myself for them, playing the part of the dutiful mother, the helpful grandmother. I had cooked, cleaned, and quietly endured the growing distance between my son and me, all while convincing myself that one day things would get better, that one day they would see how much I had done for them. But that day never came. And now, as I stood in the cold night, feeling the weight of my decision, I realized that I had spent far too long being invisible to my own family. I had allowed myself to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to be relegated to the sidelines. I had been the one who gave, and yet no one had ever given back, not in the way that mattered. I walked, not really knowing where I was going. My mind was spinning. How did I let it go this far? I thought, how did I let them treat me like this? But in the back of my mind, something was shifting. A sense of clarity, a quiet but undeniable awareness that I was more than what they had reduced me to. I wasn't just their maid. I wasn't just the woman who cooked their meals and took care of their household. I was Margaret. I had lived a life filled with hard work, love, and sacrifice. I had built this family, and yet somewhere along the way, I had lost myself in the process. The tears came as I walked, not in great sobs, but in quiet trickles, the kind of tears that seemed to drain everything out of me. But there was no shame in them, no regret. There was only the cold and the overwhelming feeling that for the first time in years, I was finally letting go of something toxic. As I made my way back to the small apartment I had been renting after I moved out of Daniel's place, I couldn't help but replay the scene over and over in my head. The maid. Emily's words echoed in my mind. They had stung so sharply because they were the truth. That's how she saw me. But in that moment, as I stood in the doorway and handed them the keys, something in me had snapped. I refused to be invisible anymore. But it wasn't just about that one dinner. It wasn't just about Emily's cruel words or Daniel's lack of response. It was everything, the years of silence, the way my love and sacrifice had gone unappreciated. I had spent so much of my life thinking that if I just kept giving, they would eventually see me. But they hadn't. They never had. And the hardest pill to swallow was that they didn't want to. As I stepped into my apartment and closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I had taken control of my life for the first time in years, but sadness because it meant that my relationship with Daniel had changed, possibly forever. The pain of that loss was sharp, but it was also freeing. I spent the night in a haze, pacing back and forth in the small, empty space. I couldn't focus on anything. Couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone, couldn't watch the TV. My mind kept replaying every moment with Daniel and Emily, every small insult, every look that had conveyed so much more than words ever could. But there was one thought that kept repeating itself. I deserve better than this. I had given so much of myself to them, to their happiness, to their comfort, that I had forgotten about my own. I had put my needs on hold, thinking that if I just took care of them, they would one day appreciate me. But that day never came. Instead, I had become an afterthought, a burden, a maid. That was when I realized something profound. I had spent my whole life building their world, and it was time to build my own. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it or what the future would look like, but I knew that I couldn't keep living for them. I couldn't keep letting them define me. It was time for me to stand up, to say no to their expectations, to say yes to myself for the first time in decades. I was done being the invisible woman, the one who always gave but never asked for anything in return. I was done being the mother who never took a moment for herself, the grandmother who was only called when needed. For the first time in my life, I realized that it wasn't selfish to take care of myself. It wasn't selfish to demand respect. It wasn't selfish to set boundaries. If anything, it was necessary. I couldn't control how Daniel or Emily saw me, but I could control how I saw myself. And I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't just the maid. I was Margaret, and it was time for me to reclaim my dignity. As the night wore on, I took out a piece of paper and started writing. I didn't know exactly what I would say or how I would say it, but I needed to start somewhere. I needed to make a plan. I needed to make sure that no one would ever treat me like that again. I wrote a list of things I needed to do, things I had put off for far too long. I needed to get my finances in order. I needed to take control of my life. I needed to stop letting my worth be measured by what I could give to others and start defining it by who I truly was. This was my time, my chance to rebuild, my chance to finally be seen, not as a maid, not as an afterthought, but as the woman I was meant to be. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve. The world hadn't changed overnight, but I had. I was no longer going to allow myself to be invisible. I wasn't going to keep playing the role they had cast me in. It was time for me to stand up, to say no, and to take my life back. The following days felt like a blur. I spent most of my time in the small apartment, pacing the floors, lost in thought. Every now and then, I would catch myself thinking back to that night. The dinner, the words, the feeling of betrayal that still lingered in my chest like a dull ache. But more than anything, what stood out in my mind was the moment I handed over the keys to my house. That was the turning point, the moment when I chose myself over them. When I made the decision to reclaim my life. The house had always been my sanctuary. It was where I had raised Daniel, where I had poured my heart into every corner, every room. It was my home, and I had built it with my own 2 hands, literally. My husband and I had spent years fixing it up, making it our own. But when he passed, I was left alone with memories of him, and then eventually with the quiet emptiness that came when Daniel and Emily moved in. I had been living in that house for years, giving up pieces of myself to keep it running smoothly for them. And when I handed them the keys that night, it felt like I was finally cutting myself free from all the expectations they had placed on me. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything I had done for them that had gone unacknowledged. The sacrifices, the time, the love. It was all being given away, all of it in one simple act. I had always believed that family came first, that it was my duty as a mother to be there for my son, no matter what. But now I realized that I had lost sight of something important, myself. The night after I left their house, I sat on the couch in my apartment, my hands trembling as I stared at the house keys in my palm. They felt heavy, like a weight I had carried for far too long. I could still see the look on Daniel's face when I handed them to him. The shock, the confusion. He didn't understand why I was leaving. He didn't understand why I was so angry. But the truth was, I didn't expect him to. He had grown so accustomed to me being there, always available, always ready to help, that he couldn't fathom a life where I wasn't constantly sacrificing for him. In a way, that was the hardest part, realizing that they hadn't even noticed. They didn't see how much I had done for them, how much I had given up. They took me for granted, assuming I would always be there, willing to take care of everything, no questions asked. But I had reached my limit. I had given them so much of myself, and now I was taking it all back. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of calm. I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. I had to start living for me. I had to start making decisions that would benefit my own well-being, not just theirs. I went into the small kitchenette of my apartment and made a cup of tea. As I sipped it, I thought about the house. I thought about the many years I had spent there, how much of my soul was embedded in every room. I had poured my love into that house, but I had also poured my sacrifices. I realized that it wasn't just the physical house I had to let go of. It was the idea of being invisible. It was the idea of being a doormat for the people I loved. I had always told myself that my sacrifices were worth it, that one day they would appreciate me. But that day never came, and I couldn't wait for it anymore. I thought back to the conversation I had had with Emily, the maid. It stung so much not because of the words themselves, but because of what they represented. She saw me as nothing more than someone who could take care of her needs, someone who would always be there to cook and clean and take care of everything, without ever asking for anything in return. But that was no longer enough for me. I had spent so many years suppressing my own needs, my own desires, in favor of theirs. I had spent so much time hoping that my love would be enough to make them see me, to make them appreciate me. But I couldn't live like that anymore. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls, trying to get my finances in order. I knew I had to start fresh. The apartment was small, but it was mine. And in that moment, I realized something. I was free. That night, as I sat down to a quiet dinner for one, I felt something that I hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes with everything being perfect, but it was the peace that comes with knowing you've finally done what was right for you. It was the peace that comes from setting boundaries, from saying enough. The phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me it was time. I picked up the receiver, my heart beating a little faster. "Hello," I said, my voice steady but with a hint of nervousness. "Margaret." It was Daniel's voice, soft and uncertain. "Mom, I don't know what's going on with you, but we need to talk." I didn't know how to respond at first. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream, to demand an apology for the way they had treated me. But I also knew that this moment wasn't about blame. It wasn't about making them feel guilty. It was about me. It was about my decision to reclaim my life, my peace, and my boundaries. "I'm not ready to talk yet, Daniel," I said quietly. "But I'm done being the person you want me to be. I've spent too long living for everyone else. Now it's my turn." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the wheels turning in Daniel's mind as he processed what I had said. "Mom, I don't understand." You don't need to understand right now, I replied. What I need is for you to respect my decision. I've been invisible for too long, and I won't let that happen anymore. I hung up the phone and sat back, the silence in my apartment feeling different now. It wasn't cold or lonely, it was empowering. For the first time in years, I felt in control. And I realized that this wasn't just about the house, about the dinner, or the insults. This was about me finally stepping into the woman I was always meant to be. The woman who wasn't afraid to speak up, to stand up for herself, to set boundaries. For the first time in a long time, I knew that I was enough. It had been a few days since I handed over the keys to my house, and the weight of it all was still settling in. I was living in a small apartment now, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was alone. Not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. I had spent my whole life absorbed in the needs and desires of everyone else, and now it was time to focus on me. I had to admit, there was a certain kind of freedom that came with being alone. The quiet was overwhelming at first, but it was also the kind of silence I had longed for. I wasn't rushing to prepare meals for anyone, cleaning up after anyone, or worrying about their happiness over my own. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to sacrifice myself. It was an odd feeling, relief mixed with sadness. That first morning, I woke up in my new bed, in my new apartment, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of obligation pressing down on me. No husband to tend to, no son to look after, no daughter-in-law to impress. It felt strange, like I was waking up in someone else's life, but in the best way possible. I had all the time in the world, and for the first time in years, it felt like it was mine to do with as I pleased. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't need to make any hasty decisions or take big leaps just yet. But one thing I knew was certain, I had to rebuild. I had to learn how to be Margaret again, not just as a mother or a wife, but as a person in my own right. I had forgotten who I was beneath all the roles I had played over the years. I started small. I took long walks through the neighborhood, something I hadn't done in years. My body, though older and slower than it once was, seemed to come alive with each step. It was as though I was rediscovering my world one breath at a time. I would pass by familiar places, parks, coffee shops, and bookstores, and realize that I had spent so much time thinking of others that I had stopped truly living in the world around me. I signed up for a pottery class. I had always loved art, but I had never given myself the chance to pursue it. The instructor was kind, the students were warm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of something creative, something just for me. I started painting again, painting for no one but myself. I had forgotten the joy of simply creating, of putting paint to canvas without worrying about whether anyone else would like it or even notice. But it wasn't just about art. It was about rediscovering the parts of myself that I had tucked away for so long. The woman who had once been full of dreams, full of hope, who had cared deeply about the world around her. That woman had gotten lost somewhere between raising a family, losing a husband, and trying to keep up with the demands of a life that had started to feel like a never-ending cycle of giving. I also began to focus on my finances. I had always been the one to handle the bills, to make sure everything was paid on time, to make sure the family was taken care of financially. But now, I needed to take charge of my own future. I reviewed my savings, looked into investments, and even began to research things like real estate and personal finance. For years, I had deferred everything to others, but now I was the one who needed to be in control of my life. I enrolled in an online course about financial independence, and slowly, but surely, I started learning how to manage money not just for survival, but to create the kind of future I wanted, one where I didn't rely on anyone else for stability. I wasn't interested in becoming a millionaire, but I wanted to feel secure, empowered, and in control of my own destiny. But it wasn't just my finances that needed a reset. It was everything. As I worked on rebuilding my life, I couldn't help but think of my son, Daniel. I still loved him deeply. I still cared about him. But I knew things could never be the same between us, not right now at least. The wounds were still too fresh, and I wasn't ready to reopen them. I had to remind myself that the decision to step away from them wasn't just about what happened that night at dinner. It wasn't just about Emily calling me the maid. It was about a lifetime of putting myself last, of being invisible in my own family. It was about realizing that I deserved to be seen, to be respected, and to be valued, not just for what I could do for others, but for who I was. I hadn't done anything wrong by setting boundaries. I hadn't been selfish by walking away. In fact, I had been the bravest I had ever been. For years, I had allowed myself to be trampled on, allowing my son and his wife to take me for granted. But when I walked away that night, I made a choice to stop living in their shadow. I chose to live for me. As the weeks passed, I started to feel a sense of hope again. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its challenges. I still missed Daniel. I still missed the family I had tried so hard to hold together. But I no longer felt the need to chase after something that was slipping away. I no longer needed their approval or validation. The old Margaret, the one who had been silenced, had started to resurface, and she was stronger than ever before. One afternoon, I decided to go to a local cafe for lunch. It was a place I had frequented with Daniel when he was younger, but this time I went alone. I walked in, ordered a sandwich, and sat down by the window, watching the world go by. There was a freedom in that moment, no one to please, no one to cater to, just me and my thoughts. It was then that I realized something important. I had spent too many years trying to fit into their world, into their expectations. But now I was creating my own. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with that. I had settled into my new routine. Every morning, I would wake up early, brew myself a cup of coffee, and enjoy the quiet solitude of my small apartment. The stillness wasn't lonely anymore, it was peaceful. I had filled my days with pottery classes, painting, and learning about financial independence. Slowly but surely, I had begun to rediscover who I was outside of being a mother, a wife, or a caretaker. I was learning that I didn't need to be anyone's maid or anyone's doormat. I could be Margaret, the woman who took care of herself for once. But as much as I was savoring my newfound freedom, there was always a quiet ache in my chest. It wasn't regret, but a yearning, a longing for the family I once had. I missed Daniel. I missed the boy who had once looked up to me for everything, the man I had spent years raising. I missed the bond we shared before everything changed. But even more than that, I missed the dream of what our relationship could have been. I had tried to push those thoughts to the back of my mind, focusing instead on my own growth. I told myself that if I just kept going, kept moving forward, the pain would eventually fade. But I also knew deep down that it wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding a life meant accepting the losses that came with it. And then one afternoon, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through some bills and planning my next move, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but there was something about it, something in the pit of my stomach that told me I should answer. I hesitated for a moment, but then I picked up. Hello, Margaret? The voice on the other end was hesitant but unmistakable. It was Daniel. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a rush of emotions flood through me all at once. Part of me wanted to hang up, to stay firm in my decision to stay away and protect myself. But another part of me, the part that still loved him so fiercely, wanted to hear him out. Yes, I said, my voice steady but with a slight tremor I couldn't hide. I've been thinking a lot, he began. There was a pause, and I could tell he was struggling to find the right words. I know things have been tense between us. I don't know what happened exactly, but I want to understand. I want to try, Mom. I swallowed, feeling a lump form in my throat. Hearing him say those words felt like a shock to my system. For so long, I had convinced myself that he would never reach out, that he had made his choice, that his loyalty was now with Emily, and I was just a footnote in their story. I'm sorry, Margaret, he continued, for everything, for not seeing you, for not appreciating what you've done. I know it wasn't right, and I should have been there for you. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Was this real? Was he finally understanding? Was it too late? I didn't know how much you were hurting, Daniel said, his voice cracking slightly. I never realized how much you sacrificed for me, for us. You gave up so much, and I didn't see it. I should have. I closed my eyes, holding the phone tighter in my hand. It was everything I had wanted to hear, everything I had hoped for. But there was still a part of me that wasn't sure if I could forgive him yet, if I could just let the hurt go. I know you must be angry with me, he went on, and I don't blame you. But I need you to know. I miss you, Mom. I miss us. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, all I could do was listen to the sound of my own heartbeat, thudding in my chest. Daniel. I began, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I'm ready to go back to how things were. I've spent so many years taking care of everyone, putting everyone else's needs before my own, and I can't do that anymore. I can't be invisible again. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. It felt like he was processing everything I had said. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. I understand, he said softly, and I'm sorry for all of it. I just want you to know that I'm here. Whenever you're ready. No pressure. The words hung in the air between us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was seeing Daniel for who he truly was, flawed, but genuinely trying. I knew there was still a long road ahead for both of us, but hearing him say that he was willing to try, that he understood, made something in me shift. I thought of everything we had been through, of how much I had sacrificed for him. I thought of the love I still had for him, the hope that one day, things would be better between us. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to carry all the weight. I'll think about it, I said, my voice softening. But I need time. I need time to heal, to figure out who I am and what I want from this. I'm not asking you to understand everything right away, but I hope you can respect that. I do, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I respect that more than you know. We said our goodbyes, and when I hung up, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't a resolution, and it wasn't an immediate reconciliation, but it was a step, a small, yet significant step in the right direction. And that was enough for now. The truth was, I didn't know if I was ready to forgive him, or if I would ever fully trust him again. But I didn't know this. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I felt like I was walking toward something new. Toward a future where I was not only a mother or a wife, but a woman who had rediscovered her voice. Toward a future where my happiness and well-being were just as important as anyone else's. The call from Daniel had left me with a mixture of emotions that I couldn't quite unravel. His apology was something I had longed to hear, but it was also something I wasn't ready to fully embrace yet. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on my own life, on the journey I had begun, the path that no longer revolved around anyone else's needs, but my own. I spent hours in my pottery class, letting my hands mold the clay into something beautiful, something entirely mine. I lost myself in the simple rhythm of creation. The feeling of the cool, smooth surface of the clay beneath my fingertips reminded me that I was still capable of building something. I could build my own life, piece by piece, just as I had once built my family, but now the foundation was mine to shape. In the evenings, I painted. The easel in the corner of my small apartment had become a place where I could pour out everything I had felt for years, but had never been able to express. The paintings were raw, unpolished in some ways, but they were the truest reflections of my soul, of the woman I was and the woman I had been afraid to become. The colors were bold, vibrant, and unapologetic. They were my voice, loud and clear on the canvas. For the first time in a long while, I felt connected to myself. I was no longer just someone's mother, someone's caretaker, or someone's servant. I was Margaret, the woman who had lived a life full of love and sacrifice, but who was finally learning to put herself first. And it was the most powerful thing I had ever felt. But as I stood there surrounded by my work, a realization settled deep inside me. I wasn't just healing for me. I was healing for everyone I loved. I wasn't rebuilding my life out of anger or resentment. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was doing this because I had to. I was doing it because somewhere deep inside, I knew that if I didn't stand up for myself now, I would spend the rest of my life regretting it. I had spent years living in the shadow of my own sacrifices, but now, for the first time, I felt like I was living in the light of my own decisions. And there was something powerful about that. One afternoon, as I was working on a new painting, one that depicted a solitary tree against a backdrop of endless sky, the phone rang again. My heart fluttered as I saw the name on the screen. It was Daniel. I had already decided that I wouldn't be rushing into any decisions or resolutions, no matter how much I loved him. My healing needed to happen on my terms, not because of guilt or pressure. But I had also promised myself that I wouldn't turn away from him completely. That was the difference between forgiveness and self-preservation. I took a deep breath before answering. Hello. Hi, Mom. Daniel's voice sounded a little more certain this time, though I could still hear the hesitation. I've been thinking about everything, about what we talked about the other night, and I want to make things right in whatever way I can. I let out a breath, steadying myself. Daniel, I'm glad you called. I really am. But I need to be clear with you. This isn't something that can be fixed overnight. I know, he replied quickly, and I'm not asking for that. I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship. I'm not asking you to forget everything or to make things okay right away. I just want the chance to prove that I can be the son you deserve. I sat there for a long moment, the silence on the other end of the line filled with unspoken emotions. The words I had longed to hear were finally here, but there was still so much I wasn't ready to face. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let the hurt go, to open that door again, but something about his tone, the sincerity in his voice, told me that he was truly trying. Daniel, I began softly, I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know how we move forward. I need time and I need space. I've spent my whole life giving to others, and now I need to figure out who I am without all of that. I understand, he said, and I could hear the weight of his words. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. It was the simplest thing, but those words felt like the first real promise he had ever made to me. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't trying to rush me. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that this wasn't about fixing things for anyone but me. This was my journey, and if Daniel wanted to be part of it, it would be on my terms. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long while, letting the silence settle around me. The truth was, I still loved my son. I would always love him. But I also knew that love was no longer enough to make everything okay. I had to protect myself first. And that meant setting boundaries, even with the people I loved most. I stood up from the couch, looking around at the work I had done, the pottery, the paintings, the plans for my future. This was the life I had built for myself, and I was proud of it. It was my life, my voice, my strength. I didn't need anyone to validate that. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I was worthy. I already knew. As I stood there looking at the unfinished painting on the easel, I realized something important. I wasn't just healing from the past. I was creating something new. And that something new, it was me. It had been several weeks since that phone call with Daniel, and although I hadn't heard from him again, something had shifted. The peace I felt in my apartment, the quiet space I had carved out for myself, had become a place of reflection. And yet, despite all my progress, there were days when the absence of my family, my son, still gnawed at me. I had learned to live with that discomfort, but it was still there, quiet, insistent. I had finally stopped thinking of what I used to be, a wife, a mother, a caretaker, and had started thinking of who I could be. The woman who stood in front of the easel now, brush in hand, was no longer just the reflection of years of sacrifice. She was someone with desires, with a future that wasn't reliant on anyone else's needs. And as much as I reveled in that autonomy, there were moments when the ache for connection crept back in, the longing for my family, for the bond one once had with Daniel. One evening, after spending most of the day in my pottery studio, I came home to a small, unexpected surprise. A letter sat on my doorstep, neatly folded with my name written across the envelope in familiar handwriting. For a moment, I hesitated. I knew it had to be from Daniel. No one else in my life would be writing to me like this. I could feel my heart quicken, unsure of what to expect. I sat down at the kitchen table and carefully opened the letter. It was short and simple, but its words pierced through the quiet walls I had built around myself. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize I can't fix everything right away. I don't know how to make things right, but I want to try. I want you to know that I respect your space and your need to heal. I don't want to rush you or make you feel like you have to be ready now. I just want you to know that I'm here. Whenever you're ready to talk, or even if you just need a moment of silence, I'm here. I miss you. I always have. Love. Daniel. I sat there, my fingers trembling slightly as I reread the words. It wasn't the grand gesture I had expected, the kind of apology that would make everything go back to normal. Instead, it was gentle, understanding, and real. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about starting from where we were now. In that moment, I realized something important. Healing wasn't just about me, it was about us, too. It wasn't about erasing the hurt or pretending like it hadn't happened. It was about acknowledging the pain and moving forward, not just for my own peace, but for the chance to rebuild the trust one once had with him. I placed the letter down and sat back, allowing the quiet to fill the space. I wasn't ready to pick up the pieces just yet, but I was ready to begin thinking about what those pieces might look like, slowly, carefully, on my own terms. The next morning, after another long day of pottery, painting, and financial planning, I walked into a small cafe near my apartment. It had become a kind of ritual for me to visit this place, sit by the window, and read or write in my journal. It wasn't much, but it was my time, a reminder of how far I had come, of how much I had learned to appreciate the small things. As I sat there, the door opened and a familiar face walked in. It was Emily. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around as if unsure of what to do, before her eyes landed on me. She paused. I could see the hesitation in her step, the way her shoulders tensed before she walked over. "Margaret," she said softly, her voice uncertain. I didn't expect to find you here." I smiled politely, though I was taken aback. Emily and I hadn't spoken much since the night of the dinner, and I hadn't expected her to seek me out, especially not in this quiet corner of my new life. But there she was, standing before me, looking as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Would you mind if I sat with you?" she asked, almost apologetically. I gestured to the empty chair across from me, still unsure of where this conversation might go, but deciding to give her the space she was seeking. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady. As she sat down, we both fell into an awkward silence for a moment. It wasn't the same tension I had felt all those months ago. It wasn't anger or resentment, but a tentative kind of respect. It felt like we were both trying to find our footing in a new reality, one where the old roles we had played were no longer relevant. "I know this isn't easy," Emily said, breaking the silence. "I don't even know where to begin, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. The way I treated you, the things I said. I wasn't thinking, and I can see now how wrong I was." I looked at her, taking in her words. They weren't just an apology. They were a recognition of what had happened, a step toward acknowledging the hurt she had caused. I hadn't expected it, but I was grateful for it. It wasn't about forgiveness, at least, not yet, but it was about her taking responsibility. "I appreciate that, Emily," I said, keeping my tone calm. "But I think we both know that apologies are just the first step. Rebuilding trust takes time. I'm not ready to be the person I was before, and I need you to understand that." She nodded, her eyes earnest. "I do understand. I know this won't be fixed overnight, but I'm here. Whenever you're ready. I want to be part of your life again, if you'll let me." Her words didn't promise an immediate fix, but they offered a chance to rebuild the pieces of what had once been a fractured relationship. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that yet, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and I realized that perhaps this wasn't just about finding my place in the world again. It was also about finding a way to trust again, with time. We sat there in silence for a while, drinking our coffee. It wasn't the easy, comfortable silence of the past, but it wasn't awkward either. It was a quiet understanding that, despite everything that had happened, we were both willing to move forward. And that, I realized, was enough for now. As the days passed after my encounter with Emily at the cafe, I found myself wrestling with a mixture of emotions. The peace I had found in my own space, in my solitude, now felt slightly more complicated. There was no going back to the way things had been, and I didn't want to. But a part of me still longed for connection, real, unguarded connection with my family. I had always believed that family was everything. It was the foundation I had built my entire life on. But now, I was beginning to realize that family wasn't just about blood or obligation. It was about respect, trust, and a shared willingness to grow together. In the past, I had sacrificed my own needs, my own happiness, to keep the family together. I had poured everything I had into keeping the wheels of the household running smoothly. But the truth was that kind of sacrifice had left me hollow, unnoticed, and unappreciated. The time had come for me to redefine what family meant, not just for me, but for everyone. The next few weeks were full of introspection. I spent long hours in my apartment, working on my art, reading books about boundaries, self-worth, and personal growth. It was a time of discovery, not just about who I was now, but who I wanted to be going forward. And then one day, I received a message that caught me off guard. It was from Daniel. "Mom, I know things are still fragile between us, but I wanted to ask if you would be open to having dinner with Emily and me. Just the three of us, no pressure, no expectations. I understand if you're not ready, but I thought it might be a good start. Love, Daniel." I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, unsure of what to do. The old part of me, the part that had always tried to keep everything together, always sacrificed her own comfort for the sake of peace, wanted to say yes, wanted to smooth things over and make everything feel normal again. But the new me, the woman who had learned to put herself first, knew that I couldn't go back to pretending. I had to be honest with myself and with them. I took a deep breath and typed my reply. "Daniel, thank you for reaching out. I'm still processing everything, but I think dinner is a good idea. Just know that I need to do this at my own pace, and I won't be pretending that everything is okay right away. I'll be there. Love, Mom." The message felt like a small step toward healing, toward understanding, but most importantly, toward honesty. I wasn't going into that dinner pretending that the past few months had been forgotten. I wasn't going to gloss over the hurt, the disappointment, or the feeling of being invisible. But I also wasn't going to let bitterness or resentment define the next chapter of my life. It was about finding a way to redefine family, to create new patterns of connection and respect. That evening, I prepared for dinner with Daniel and Emily. I didn't dress up to impress anyone. I dressed for myself. The old part of me, the one who had spent years trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect wife, was still there, but now she was tempered with wisdom, experience, and self-respect. As I put on my simple blouse and favorite pair of jeans, I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't need to be anyone else. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be me. When I arrived at their home, I was greeted with a warmth that felt unfamiliar. Daniel opened the door, his face a mixture of hope and anxiety. Emily stood behind him, her smile cautious but sincere. "Mom, thank you for coming," Daniel said, his voice soft but genuine. "I know this is a big step, and I don't take it lightly." I smiled, but it was a guarded smile. "I'm here, Daniel. Let's take it one step at a time." We sat down at the table, and for a moment there was silence. The kind of silence that comes when you're unsure of where things stand, unsure of how to bridge the gap between the past and the present. But this silence wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't tense or loaded with unspoken accusations. It was simply the silence of people who were still figuring things out. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye," Emily said, her voice quiet but steady. "And I know I hurt you, Margaret. I'm sorry for that. I want to be better. For you, for Daniel, for all of us." Her apology was sincere, but it didn't come with any expectation. She wasn't asking for forgiveness right away, and I respected that. I didn't feel the need to rush into forgiveness either. Healing took time, and it was a process I was still very much in the middle of. "Thank you, Emily," I replied. "I don't know where we go from here, but I'm willing to see, to try. But it's going to take time." The conversation flowed from there, gently at first, like we were all testing the waters. We talked about the weather, the work we'd been doing, the small, everyday things that made us who we were. It felt different. There was an honesty in the air that hadn't been there before. We weren't pretending, we weren't forcing smiles. We were just being real. And that was the key to rebuilding, to stop pretending, to stop hiding behind roles, behind expectations, to simply be who we were, flaws and all. As the evening went on, I realized that this was the first time in a long while that I wasn't holding back, that I wasn't suppressing my feelings for the sake of keeping the peace. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of connection, not because things were perfect, but because they were real. We were finally meeting each other where we were, not where we thought we should be. When dinner was over, we didn't rush the goodbyes. We didn't pretend that everything had been fixed. But there was an understanding, a mutual recognition that we were all on a journey of healing, that we all had our own work to do, but we were doing it together, in our own time, on our own terms. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not just for the future, but for me, for the woman I was becoming, for the life I was building, for the relationships that were evolving around me. I didn't need to be anyone else. I just needed to be myself. And that was enough. The weeks following the dinner with Daniel and Emily were a delicate balance of progress and pause. We had taken a significant step forward, but it was clear that the road ahead would be filled with bumps, with moments of uncertainty. Still, something had shifted inside me after that evening, a shift that went deeper than my relationship with them. It was a shift in myself. For years, I had been defined by my roles: mother, wife, caretaker. I had given my time, my energy, and my heart, thinking that the love and sacrifice would come back to me, that my value was tied to my ability to care for others. But as I sat with those thoughts, I realized how much I had neglected my own needs, my own self-worth. I had spent decades giving, but had never really learned how to receive, or how to put my own well-being first. The turning point had come when I handed over the keys to my house. It wasn't just an act of walking away. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the moment I realized that my worth was not contingent on being needed by others. And as I looked back at how far I'd come since then, I could feel a quiet pride in myself, pride that wasn't about what I had done for others, but about what I had done for me. I had begun to build something new, and it wasn't just my art or my financial independence. It was my sense of self-worth. It was the recognition that I had a right to live for myself, to make decisions based on my own desires, not just out of a sense of duty or obligation. I didn't need anyone else's approval to be worthy. I was worthy because I existed. One afternoon, I was sitting in my favorite cafe, the place I had started to frequent more often since my move. The sunlight was streaming through the window, casting a warm glow over everything. I had just finished a new painting, one of a woman standing tall, looking toward the horizon. She wasn't looking back at the past. She was looking forward, eyes set on something new, something better. As I sat there, sipping my tea and staring at the painting, I felt a quiet moment of peace. I wasn't looking for anyone's validation anymore. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I was doing the right thing or that I had made the right choices. I knew I had. That's when the phone rang. It was Daniel. My stomach did a small flip, but I answered. Hello. Hi, Mom. His voice was warm, but there was a softness to it that I hadn't heard in a while. I wanted to ask you something. I've been thinking. I know we're still figuring things out, but I wanted to know if you'd be willing to come to a family gathering this weekend. Nothing big, just a small get-together. Emily and I are hosting it, and we'd really love for you to come. I hesitated, thinking about the invitation. It wasn't about the gathering itself, but what it represented. It was another test, a chance for me to decide if I was ready to take another step toward rebuilding what had been broken. The old me would have said yes without hesitation, just to keep the peace. But the new me, this woman who had learned to put herself first, needed to make sure she wasn't just being invited out of obligation. I'll think about it, Daniel, I said softly. I'm not sure I'm ready for a big gathering yet, but I'll let you know. I understand, Mom. No pressure. I just wanted to extend the invitation. Whenever you're ready. The call ended, and I sat there for a moment, letting his words settle. I appreciated the gesture, but I knew that I couldn't rush into anything. It wasn't about them anymore, it was about me. I had to honor my own pace, my own healing. And if I wasn't ready, that was okay. In the following days, I focused more on myself. I spent more time at the pottery studio, allowing the process of creating to be an act of healing. The spinning wheel, the clay in my hands, it was a meditation of sorts. With each piece I formed, I felt more grounded, more connected to myself. It was a process I couldn't rush, just like my own emotional recovery. I had learned that some things needed time to shape and solidify on their own. By the end of the week, I still wasn't sure if I was ready for the family gathering. But I did know this. I wasn't afraid anymore. The old fear I used to carry, the fear of being alone, of not being needed, had started to fade. I didn't need a gathering to validate my worth. I didn't need anyone to confirm that I mattered. I knew it already. That Saturday, I decided to take a walk through the park, something I hadn't done in a while. The air was crisp, and the leaves were just beginning to change color. As I strolled along the path, I noticed how different everything felt. Brighter, more vibrant, as though the world was unfolding before me in ways I had never truly seen. I realized in that moment how much I had been missing before, how much I had closed myself off to the possibilities of life outside of my roles. When I got home, I sat down and wrote in my journal. I wrote about all the things I had learned, the strength I had found, the love I had given myself. And then I wrote about the invitation. I wasn't ready to go to the family gathering, not yet. But I had no doubt that in time I would be. I was learning to trust myself again, to trust my intuition, and to know that my journey was mine to take. I wasn't defined by my past, by my relationships, or by my sacrifices. I was defined by my choices now. And for the first time, I was choosing myself. The weeks after the family gathering invitation felt like a turning point for me. I had spent so much time in my own head, processing, reflecting, growing, that the thought of going back into the world I had once belonged to felt a little daunting. The prospect of returning to a family dynamic, especially one that had been fractured and painful, stirred a mixture of excitement and trepidation within me. But there was something else I had learned throughout this entire journey. I didn't need to rush. The beautiful thing about rediscovering yourself was that you didn't need to explain your pace to anyone. My healing, my growth, it was something for me to measure, to guide, to understand. That's why, when the day of the gathering arrived, I sat with the invitation for a while, letting it sit on the table in front of me. I wasn't going to say yes out of a sense of obligation. I had already given that up. I wasn't going to let guilt or past patterns dictate my decisions anymore. This was my moment of truth, the moment when I finally had the power to choose what felt right, not what I was expected to do. The phone rang again that afternoon. It was Daniel. Mom. His voice was tentative, but there was an undercurrent of hope in it that I couldn't ignore. I know you're not sure about tonight, and I just wanted to say, don't feel like you have to come if you're not ready. We'll understand. His words were filled with patience, the kind I hadn't always received in the past. There was no pressure, no expectation. It was an invitation, not a demand. It was a sign that he was truly starting to respect the boundaries I had put in place. I took a deep breath and smiled softly to myself. This was the difference. It wasn't just about the family gathering. It was about my growth. It was about being seen for who I was, not for what I could do for others. It was about being asked, not expected. I appreciate you calling, Daniel, I said, my voice steady. I'm not sure yet if I'm ready to join tonight, but I promise it's not because I don't want to. I need more time and I need to be sure. I understand, Mom. I'll be here when you're ready, he said, his voice full of warmth. Take your time. We're not going anywhere. The conversation ended, and I sat for a long while, the weight of my decision still hanging in the air. But this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like freedom, the freedom to choose. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set, I decided to take a walk through the park. I had been avoiding it for a while, unsure of what it might stir up. The park was where I used to take Daniel when he was younger, where we would play catch, watch the leaves fall, and talk about life. It had been a symbol of everything I had given, my time, my love, my heart. But now, it was a place I could go on my own without the past weighing on me. As I walked down the familiar path, I felt a profound sense of release. The trees, Once a reminder of all the times I had given everything to others, now seemed to stand tall, unbothered by the past. The wind whispered through the leaves, and for the first time in a long time, I felt connected, not to my past, but to the future. I didn't need to go to that gathering. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The real work was already done. It was in the quiet moments of healing, in the decisions I had made, in the way I had chosen myself over and over again. And as I walked, I realized that I was beginning to feel the weight of my freedom. Real, authentic freedom. When I returned home, I took a deep breath and picked up my paintbrush. There was something calming about the act of creating. It was a release. With each brushstroke, I was reminded that I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. I began to paint the landscape of the park I had walked through. The winding path, the tall trees, and the open sky above. It wasn't just a picture of the park. It was a reflection of the journey I had taken. The path had once been unclear, tangled in my expectations, but now it was open, wide, and inviting. The sky above was clear, unburdened, and I was standing in the center of it all, looking toward my future. I didn't know exactly what would happen next. I didn't know if I would ever fully reconcile with Daniel, or if things would ever return to how they once were. But that was okay. What mattered now was that I was standing in my own power. I was shaping my own path, my own future. And for the first time in years, I was free to choose what that looked like. It had been months since that dinner invitation from Daniel, and in those months, I had learned more about myself than I ever could have imagined. I had come so far from the woman who once lived in the shadows of her family's needs, who believed her worth was defined by how much she gave and how little she asked for in return. That woman, the one who thought her purpose was to be everything to everyone, had been replaced by a stronger, more self-aware version of me. And for the first time in my life, I was starting to truly live for myself. The family gathering came and went, and as I expected, I wasn't quite ready to attend. I had given myself the space to reflect, to understand that healing doesn't always mean rushing back to what once was. I didn't need the gathering to feel validated. I already had what I needed: peace, clarity, and a sense of my own worth. But what truly mattered wasn't whether I attended that dinner or not. What mattered was that for the first time in years, I was making decisions for me, not out of guilt or obligation, but because I wanted to. The calls from Daniel had continued, each one a little warmer, a little more understanding. We hadn't rushed to dive back into a perfect relationship, but we were talking, truly talking, without the weight of years of silence between us. There was no pressure, just the simple reality that both of us were learning how to be present, not just for each other, but for ourselves. I still didn't know what the future held for us, or whether our relationship would ever look like it once had. But I had accepted that the answer wasn't for me to decide right now. What mattered was the peace I had found in myself. I had learned that my happiness didn't need to be wrapped in approval from others. I could be whole on my own. And for once, I wasn't afraid to embrace that. The true beauty of this journey wasn't just the moments of healing with my family, or the artistic creations that came from my newfound freedom. It was the fact that I was learning to trust myself again. I was learning to listen to the quiet whispers of my heart, not the loud demands of everyone else's expectations. I had stopped apologizing for taking up space, for demanding the same respect I had always given so freely to others. One evening, after another long day of painting and pottery, I sat outside on the small balcony of my apartment, watching the sun set behind the distant skyline. The sky was a canvas of soft oranges and pinks, and as I watched the colors fade into the night, I felt a quiet sense of contentment wash over me. It was a feeling I hadn't known in years, a feeling that I was finally living for myself, that I was no longer defined by what I could give to others. I had given myself the gift of time. Time to heal, time to find peace, time to be unapologetically me. I thought of Daniel again, the son I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. I thought of Emily, who had, in her own way, begun to recognize the importance of boundaries and respect. I had learned that family wasn't a set of expectations. It was a living, breathing thing that could evolve. It could shift and grow, but only if the people involved were willing to grow too. The future was still uncertain, but that didn't scare me anymore. It was no longer about perfection or fixing what was broken. It was about embracing the journey. It was about walking forward, knowing that I had the strength to stand on my own, with or without the approval of others. I stood up, feeling the soft breeze brush against my face, and smiled. There was still much to do, many chapters to write, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what was to come. I had found my voice. I had found my freedom. And that was all I needed to move forward.